The months are starting to get warmer, so we're gonna start talking about more water cooling stuff. We're not gonna start talking about the light loop. I just wanted to show it for a moment because Be Quiet's actually launched recently their Silent Loop 3. It's actually up to a 420 millimeter, which is awesome. I love seeing more 420 millimeter coolers because a lot of cases really do support them now, and just, you can never have too much cooling, but you can definitely have too little. But both of these feature something that I want to play around with today, which is specifically the fact that you can refill them. And that is the #1 killer of AIOs, is some of the fluid will evaporate slowly over time, then they cavitate, then they kill the pump. So as long as you can keep your loop topped off, which is what open loop is a nice feature, then they should last for a long time. So today we're gonna talk about that feature. We're gonna test it out. I'm gonna actually drain some fluid out and fill it back up and see how easy that process is. Today's video is brought to you by the new, really super cool JSUSense Melty connector shirt, you know, paying tribute to one of the best designs that's clearly ever existed. And if you don't like the Vaporwave colors, we've got our OG gray and red colors available now. So get yours by following the link in the description below.
Nice.
Ow, I have a thigh cramp. So this is my first time actually looking at the new light loop. We have quite a few of these actually that were sent to us for our test benches. Why? I've got the EK 360s on there, and I'm not changing them because they're EK, but believe it or not, they are starting to make the air bubble sound. They are quite a few years old actually. I think they're 3 years old now, our versions, and they weren't ran for that entire time, but whether they're running or not, evaporation occurs. So it's time to change them out. So we'll actually be putting the light loops on there. Although Silent Loop in 360 would have been nice because I don't care about the RGB, but we're gonna use the Light Loop 360s because it's easier to mount 360s to our open air test benches than the 420s. That one on the right over there where the Zotac is on right now, that one actually, when it's running, you randomly hear bubbles make their way through the pump. And even though they're not mounted perfectly like above the pump, the radiator is still higher than the pump. So that just tells me some air is in the system. Now those are vacuum filled at the factory. You cannot service them. And non-serviceability of the AIOs is the #1 drawback to them. So I guess we can just kind of unbox these. So these are like the legit, the same case fans that you would get if you were to buy the Silent Wings fans. So they're like exactly the same fan. The difference is they're just labeled Silent Loop 3, as you can see on the fan right there, because of the fact that they come with the Silent Loop. So the label's a little different, but the fan quality is identical, which is nice to see because a lot of times when a brand that makes fans and AIOs, they always tend to skimp and like put a lesser quality fan on their pump and radiator for whatever reason, but not the case here. But this is a more understated, okay, here we go. So here is our fluid. Oh, it did leak a little. That's what I was worried about. Even though the top is sealed and stuff, because these travel like through air freight and go through all these different temperatures and altitudes and stuff, at least they put it in a separate bag. There's still plenty in here to be able to top off, but we're gonna need to dry that up. And because it is a glycol, it is going to be sticky, and that sucks. But anyway, there's that. As I started to say, this one's pretty understated. Like the only RGB on here is, as you can see, is on top of the pump, which is kind of nice. So that's why the light loop, as it sounds, that's weighty. The light loop is more about light, and the Silent Loop here is more about acoustics. I do like the look of this though. It's got a pretty, I like the way it almost looks like the grill on a car, which is kind of nice. Obviously the RGB is under there. I was kind of surprised at how heavy this pump is. If we look at the cold plate though, you can see it definitely is larger now than older AIOs because of the fact that we have to count for larger IHSs on things like Intel's 12th gen and newer, obviously, which is no longer a square, it's kind of a large rectangle. So this gives you better contact area over the larger IHSs. In terms of plugs, this has a single 4-pin PWM to power the pump. So you would need to plug this into your high amp header or your water pump header on your motherboard. And then a single RGB header right here for obviously the lighting. So then it's gonna be extremely simple to wire these up. Here's the rad, big old chunky 420 mil. And interestingly enough, the ports on this are actually different. So maybe I will unbox the light loop to show you. We have one port on here It's not on the end tank, which is kind of interesting. It's over here. It's right there. So you can see it's just a Phillips head, which is going to be easy to remove. And the idea would be you fill it like this. Like you would want to actually hang the pump like off something so it's lower. So this is the highest point in the loop, maybe even tilt it. And then that's where we would be able to make sure all the air can get its way out. And then we top it off and then we seal it back up. First question is, how much air is actually in here? Very little. Like I hear like maybe the tiniest slosh ever. Some of the other rads that we've had with AIOs, you shake them and you get like a it sound like maracas because there's so much air in there from the factory. You can only get so much fill through a vacuum fill. And yes, ideally vacuum sounds perfect, but it always tends to leave a little bit more air in there than if you were able to actually fill it this way. Because the idea with vacuum fills is you still have to top it off a little bit, whether you're vacuum filling a cooling system in a car or a radiator. That's kind of it. Is there a hub that comes in here at least for the fans and stuff? So here is a 3-way PWM splitter. So that's for your 3 fans to plug into. And then we have all of our mounting brackets for our different, so this is gonna be for AMD right here, clearly. Dang, big old giant bracket for AMD. Kind of nice. So this, you have to take off the plastic retentions that are on the motherboard, and then these self-contained screws will mount down on that. You have all your Intel bracketry, pump screws and stuff, but no hub or anything like that. So you're gonna have to still run this to a motherboard header, which is perfectly fine with me. Now I wanna unbox the light loop real quick. Okay, so here's the older radiator. Ooh, it actually looks nicer in my opinion, look at that. It's got this kind of a design in the side of the rad. You can see here the silent loop is just more of just a regular bevel, I guess. Doesn't look bad in any way, just I kind of like this design a little more. But we have 2 fill ports. We've got this guy here, which if I was to pull this little rubber fill out, there is a small like hex fitting in there, like a Allen key fitting. I'm fairly certain this is where they do the factory fill. And then we've got this one here, which is actually underneath this sticker. They give you extra stickers too. That's where you can top it back off. You can see that's got the same Phillips head screw and whatnot. I also like that this one's at the top of the rad because this makes it a bit easier, in my opinion, to potentially get all the air out, because look how low this is, right? So right there, any air in here is going to work its way to the top. And I feel like getting the air out of this guy might be potentially easier than with this laid on its side like this. It's also interesting to me how close together the fittings are, or the tubes are on the rad on this guy versus the more standard spacing on that. Overall too, this feels like it might be this looks like it might be a smaller diameter tube, like definitely 1/4 inch ID. This one might also be 1/4 inch ID, maybe a thicker tube. So they're not just scaled up versions of the same AIO. I kind of really want to point that out. Okay, so let's take this over to the test bench real quick and at least light it up so you can see what the light looks like in person. I'm not going to be doing like a full like temperature test or anything on this today. I just wanted to really talk about because I think we all know, and I've done a pretty like in-depth AIO comparison between like, we did it with the Arctic, we did like the 240, the 280, the 360, and the 420, and I have a pretty good comparison showing how the temperature scales with that. Maybe I'll revisit that video with the silent loop and I'll do it there as well. I think they have 240, 360, and 420. They might have a 280. If they do, I think I'll redo that test because that'll be interesting. But today I'm really more interested in doing the video specifically about servicing the AIO. All AIOs perform very similar to each other as long as the cold plate makes good contact. You know, the pump is on top of the cold plate. This is a bit of a limiting design overall, but it's still better than having it inline, right, in the tubes or anything like that, or built into the radiator. This is still preferred over the way other people have gotten around the Asetek patents. But again, if you can't service it, then it has a shorter lifespan than something that you can service as long as you can keep air out of it. But first, we gotta go look at the RGB. All right, so here we go. Standard 3-pin header on any motherboard. Here. All right, so standard 3-pin header on any motherboard or controller. And there you go. It's not like all crazy in your face. As you can see, it is a gradient. So you got a nice diffused light under there. If you don't care about RGB and stuff, that's fine. turn it off, set it to a different color, or do this. Okay, so I'm just gonna use my iFixit kit and take this over to my sink. And then we are going to drain some of this out of there. Cool. Let's take a look at this plug real quick. Should have a big O-ring on it. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that sucker was actually pretty full. Okay, I would say that's pretty full. Because as you can see, it is like right there at the surface. Look at that. See that? It is right there. Might even squish some out right now as I tighten this on there. Look at that. So we actually just lost a little right now. That's fine. So as you can see, the vacuum, or excuse me, the factory fill on this is very much full. So let's go ahead and drain a little out, I guess. Because there's no other valve open, there's like a bit of a, it's gotta have air in, liquid out, right? So let's see what it sounds like now. Oh geez, I fix it. Oh no, okay. I feel like this is what most AIOs tend to sound like. So that would actually be a problem, in my opinion. Remember, you shake it more than twice, you're playing with it. Or you're beating it like this. Well, then you're... Yeah. All kinds of air in there. Isn't that good? All right. Let's now fill this sucker back up. So this just unthreads. Then we have a pretty small nozzle to be able to stick it in the hole to make sure we can get as good of a fill as possible. Now I feel like to fill this, we would want the rad to be elevated a little bit like that. That way any air that's in the top row can make its way up. Look, you see it sucking it in? Cool, oh, it took some. All right, let me get the cap. Dude, it is completely silent now. It's a good sign when some's squished out right now because that tells me it was completely full. Listen to the pump now. There's gonna be a little bit of air in there. Yeah, it sounds like it did from the factory now. Okay, so let's talk about this real quick. So it went from like a sloshy mess to like that would be dead quickly because that much air in there would definitely cavitate in the pump and cause the pump to die. The nice thing though is that we were able to fill it back up to a very full scenario, back to where it was. And you heard it quiet down actually, quite a bit actually. So the nice thing is, I think it'd be worth, after 2 years like it says, to take it out of your system entirely. Something like this would be easy to do because you have just the one fan splitter going to one AIO or one fan header, another fan header and an RGB cable, which would make it pretty easy to take out of your system. To go through this process of hooking it up to your power supply and letting it run outside like this and filling it up while it's running. The nice thing is because this is the inlet to the pump, means that it's gonna pull any fluid down rather than pushing this way and having it be the outlet, which means as soon as you top that or unplug that plug, if it was running, it would just shoot the fluid back out. It's very much like how you would top off the radiator in a car. Even when the car is running, most radiator fill caps are on the feed side to the water pump. That way the water pump pulls the water down. That way you can top it off as it's running. Although some cars like Chrysler and Dodge have a reverse flow system where it actually goes up and then into the rad and then down. So those would have the opposite effect of what we're trying to do here. But I think when it comes to filling it up, I was having a hard time getting it to actually fill by just letting gravity replace the air. Having the pump move the fluid and the air with it clearly got us the best result. But you know, Be Quiet's not the first company to come up with a refillable AIO design, but I think they have one of the nicest ones and easiest to use. Ideally, it'd be nice to be able to have a reservoir in here somehow, which would make it easier, but obviously then it would be bulkier and it wouldn't be as compatible with cases as an AIO would be if it had an extra res or something on there. But I think it's a neat design. I'm happy that it worked, because I was kind of like, for a minute there thinking, uh-oh, this is kind of hard to fill. So probably not the most user-friendly to have to run the pump while doing it, but I guess technically you could do this too by, if it's still in your system, putting it on its side. And that's only gonna work though if the tubes are on your outlet side of your case, like this is the back wall where your exit fan and stuff would be. So if you were going like this, that'd be doable. But if you have it like this, like a lot of people, like a lot of people would, having their tubes towards the front to take up some of that slack. That way when you put it in your system, you know, it's kind of like that. I guess a nice feature would be, well, it wouldn't work because if we put another fitting here, that'd be the outlet, which would then have the pressurized side, like I said, so that wouldn't work. So I guess if you were to install it in your system like this, Jesus, Jay. Right? Not as pretty, but then you would be able to actually just tilt your system on its side, let the pump run and top it off like you just saw me do. And this stuff is non-conductive. So if it did drip and get on something, it's not gonna really hurt anything. Even though there's water in there, because it's the propylene glycol, it's not very conductive. So nice feature. One that I wish more AIOs had, but I don't know what the patent situation is on those. So there you go. That's the Be Quiet silent loop. The light loop, this guy here, like I showed, actually has it on the end tank of the rad. And I suspect this made it so that you had to take the radiator out of your system to use, which is why they moved it to the side like this. They're probably thinking, like I just said, you could leave it in your system and then tilt it on its side and fill it up like that. And if your system's low enough, you could potentially not even have to run your pump. You could get some fluid in there, run the pump, and then fill it up like I just showed. So I think this is a pretty neat function. I'm happy to see it, especially as a water cooling enthusiast. Anything to make the value more long-term, make more long-term sense. So if you're sitting here like going, well, man, the problem with AIOs is they have like a 3-year lifespan. I mean, if you make it to 5 years on an AIO, you're ahead of the curve. All right, so it may not be the most like elegant design, but it's nice to be able to refill your AIO. It'll be very difficult to ever fill it as good as they do at the factory. They probably do a vacuum fill through there. But still, being able to put any fluid back in there is actually not a bad thing. There's always gonna be some air in a system. Doesn't matter if it's an open loop or a closed loop, it's impossible to get all of the air out at all. But the more air that you can get out, the better. And then as long as you're mounting your AIO in the correct orientations where your radiator is above your pump, ideally tubes would be at the bottom, but most cases do not allow for this. It's just the tubing's not long enough. So like this or like this. But like I showed, if you go this way with it, then the screw faces out and you could do what I just did by having the pump run to bleed itself with it still in the system. Otherwise you'd have to drop the radiator out if you go that way. Nice to see. I think it's little things like this that make AIOs relevant because most people would say, just get a high quality air cooler. It's not worth the hassle of water. And the biggest thing they're usually referring to is the fact that they evaporate and they die. Unfortunately, that's hopefully not the case with this one here. The electronics in the pump should last many, many years as long as it's not having to fight by moving air. Moving air is what kills them. They definitely can burn out, and it could actually burn out the bearings and all sorts of stuff if air gets in there. Most of the pumps are lubricated by the coolant, which is why the propylene glycol is nice because it's also like a lubricant. And if air is in there, that's just the quickest way to kill it. So, all right guys, thanks for watching. Consider it if you guys are looking at AIOs that are serviceable. And once again, a huge thanks to Be Quiet for sending this to us, as well as the light loops for our test benches. I just missed the trash can 3 feet from it, whatever. All right, it's been one of those days. It's time to go. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll put links down below so you guys can go and check it out. We'll see you in the next one.